Morning everyone. We will start the webinar in 2 minutes. So for those who have not edited their names, so you can be recognized, you can do so in your Zoom platform. Again, to all our Zoom participants, please indicate your name and your affiliations so you can be recognized. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I request everyone to stand up for the Philippine National Anthem and Invocation.
Bayang magiliw, pero ng silanganan, alam ng first time that the government agency responsible for fertilizer and pesticide is sharing our responsibility, especially for the youth.
Sa farm, naka-PPE. Ang aming ipinabahagi ay yung tamang pamamaraan tungkol sa wastong paggamit ng PPE.
Good morning po sa ating lahat. Magandang umaga, maayong buntag. Good morning, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our viewers who may be watching from other regions of the world. I hope everyone is doing well despite the pandemic. Viewers natin watching while working from home, viewers who are skeletal staff in the office, viewers who are currently in the field or mga nasa sasakyan pa, I hope everyone has a stable internet connection so you can watch this webinar. Let us acknowledge first some of our guests or some of our participants or watchers here at Zoom. Sir Ryan Pete Zamora of Tadeco. Good morning, sir. Ma'am Joanne P. Sadoral. Sir Rodgen Dipon from Davao City. Leonil Pangot from Benguet State University. Leopoldo Valdez, CB Andrew Asia. Good morning, Sir Clyde Abayon of Aklan State University. Good morning din kay Sir Hill C. Suwan from FMC Corporation. Good morning kay Ma'am Diane Dane Aviles, who's watching from Surigao del Sur. Ma'am Evelyn P. Vedasto from Aklan State University. Good morning po sa inyong lahat. Kay Sir Clyde G. Abayon, also from Aklan State University. Melavi R. Hosol from Davao City. Everyone from Davao Oriental State College of Science and Technology, San Isidro, Davao Oriental. Good morning po sa ating lahat. So I hope everyone had their breakfast, coffee. Sana alive and awake tayong lahat because this will be more or less 2 hours of webinar. A lot of information will be given which is relevant to all of us. So yun po. Moving on with the program, I would like to introduce the President of CropLife Philippines to deliver the welcome remarks. Let's all welcome Ms. Veronica Tiburcio.
Yeah, thank you, Carlo. I hope everyone can hear me. Can I hear a yes?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Maayong maayong aga, maayong buntag sa ating lahat. My name is Veng. I'm the president of CropLife Philippines, and we are really happy to see a lot of participants right now from different stakeholders. We have a lot of maybe students, IBGs, of course FPA, very supportive director really, and our members, no. So we are really happy, and this is not a first time for CropLife to do this webinar, but I think this is the first time that we invited banana growers, right? And we will focus more on the MRLs. So CropLife is a nonprofit organization. It composed of many companies. I will not mention any more because you've seen previously in the slide. But why we're doing this? Why we're doing this kind of webinars? Well, if there is no pandemic, actually, we will do this face to face. So that's the advocacy of CropLife. It's not about profit. It's more of the concern of to our partners, no, especially to our growers. We would like to make sure that we have a sustainable agriculture. So in this webinar, what we actually focus is to really reinforce the importance and understanding of the MRL and the good agricultural practice that we have. And maybe there are some questions in terms of principles on the dietary risk assessment. We have experts, we invited experts to discuss that today. And of course, any initiatives that we have regarding the PNS for MRL for banana, we will be discussing that today. So I hope that everyone will continue to participate. I know if you have more questions, if there's something that you want to be clarified, please use the chat box here so that we will be able to answer your questions, your queries. And rest assured that we will, in case that we will not be able to answer it, we will at least have time to answer it after this webinar. So again, thank you so much for all the participants here, guests, our speakers, of course, the CropLife committee, who's really leading this one. And looking forward to see more webinars with you as well. Thank you, Carlo.
Thank you very much, Ms. Veronica Tiburcio. And this time, to give us an inspirational message, let's all welcome the Executive Director of the Fertilizer and Pesticide Authority, the very active Director Wilfredo C. Roldan.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I would do the standard introduction because not only because we have been doing this a lot of time, but I'm very honored to be invited today. Especially, we will be talking on a very important export product of the country, about banana. So first of all, I would like to recognize the president of CropLife Philippines, my friend Veronica Tiburcio. Good morning, ma'am. To John Julius Manuben of the National Crop Protection Center of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Good morning, sir.
Good morning po.
To Dr. Amelia Tejada, a good friend and supporter of EPA in the technical aspect. Good morning, Doctora. To Cristel Alarese Aborido of the Bureau of Agriculture and Fisheries Standards. Good morning. And to Ed De Luna, my counterpart in the CropLife and the EPA, the Executive Director of CropLife Philippines. Good morning. And to all speakers for today and the organizers of this webinar, very important to us, and to all the participants now present, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, and to the observers from other countries, good morning to everyone. I am very glad that this webinar today has exemplified our pillars of the industry. Remember when I was assigned here at the EPA in 2016, we cemented the 4 pillars so that this industry will become vibrant and responsive to the economy, to the farmers, to the industry, and to the players of the industry. So this occasion today exemplifies the 4 pillars about the stakeholders who are members of participants of the pesticide industry. The academe, that's why we are happy that the National Crop Protection Center of the University of the Philippines is with us today, and to the scientists who are working for innovations, helping the pesticide to be more responsive. And of course, the farmers, now the players, including those that are uh, contract growers for banana. So this one gives me an elation, a feeling of joy that after almost 5 years now, it has gained some interest because to me, this is a very important part of the journey for Philippine agriculture. The government is holding hands with the private sectors. The government is holding hands with the academe. The government is holding hands with the planters, with the farmers, for better yield at saka masaganang buhay ng ating farmers. So this enough will tell me, will give me more reason to be inspired. Instead of giving you inspirational talk, I am more inspired with this happening. And now the continuing education has been exemplified by the association working hands in hand with the government. So this is the right direction that we are doing. And it also coincides with the 8 paradigms of the Department of Agriculture, particularly in the aspect of modernization, industrialization, and additional investments to the agriculture. So I hope we can learn more today among the speakers. But I will give you a little background that will give you some hope of joy about the banana industry. I have to touch base with feedback from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, or the FAO, in the report in the last quarter of 2020 about the banana market review. This was released in the first quarter for this year for the Philippines, and it says it has poised to cement its position as the world's second largest exporter of bananas in the next 9 years, on the back of better supply management. So we're going now the supply management and the high demand from key ASEAN countries, now particularly the demand coming from China. The FAO projected the Philippine banana production would continue to expand in the following years back of the successful disease management and ample investment, yield improvements, and area expansion. FAO added that the global demand for Philippine bananas would be mainly driven by the burgeoning import demands from China, as well as the sustained income-driven demand from Japan. So banana per capita consumption in China is increasing, while it rise only by 1.1, but you can imagine how big is 1.1 in the China market. So the Philippine Statistics Authority also reported that the period of October to December 2020, banana production was estimated at 2.4 million metric tons. Very small increase, 0.4 increase against the same period last year. The Cavendish variety had the highest production of 1.2 million metric tons, which shared 50% of our total export of banana. This is followed by Sabah, sa aming Bisaya, Sabah, the bigger banana, 28%. And Davao region remained to be the top producer of banana with 846.3 million metric tons, sharing 35% of our total banana. This was followed by Northern Mindanao and Soxargen with 21 and 14% respectively sharing. But there are challenges. It says that the country's largest and the biggest group, the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, is calling on the government to diversify local banana industry in order to keep up with the increasing competitive global market. With the growing market competition, of course, there are competition. PCCI urged the government to accelerate the modernization, as I have said earlier, part of the 8 paradigms of the Department of Agriculture and industrialization for the agricultural sector. But despite being one of the top exporters of Cavendish in the world, the Philippines is now also uh, losing some banana export amid the continuous competition in the global market. PCCI said that we need to encourage farmers to intercrop and grow saba or cardaba due to the growing market of frozen banana and banana chips. Given this data, it becomes a challenge to the industry, particularly now among the independent growers. It is important we have to continue supporting the needs of the banana. The industry right now is what we are doing is a manifestation of our commitment to improve our way of managing the banana industry, which in the course includes the independent banana growers. Maybe in the past we have not done so much about the independent growers, but I think this is so important. That's why I recall in 2018 or 19 when we had that issue of MRL, and we have some meeting in Davao. I remember saying the management or the MRL should be a shared responsibility. It is not only the responsibility of the corporate farmers, the stakeholders, but more so with the independent growers who will be responsible without any supervision in the application of pesticides. And that way we can control together how we can come up with a good MRLs. So again, I think so much about the event now, taking the lead being taken by CropLife. So the world exporter of quality bananas through compliance with the international standard of food safety and security. So ito pong ginagawa natin. We have to be within the international standard of food safety and security. We have to take necessary action to either prevent or contain the perennial problem of Panama disease or Fusarium wilt that is currently affecting banana farms and plantations in Mindanao. We have also to strengthen our resiliency to cope up with the challenges brought by the adverse weather like drought, etc. And now aggravated by the impact on COVID-19. But nevertheless, the Filipinos have been shown to be very resilient. And this government, including EPA, will be there with you hand in hand, holding hand in hand. That's why I commend CropLife today for initiating this seminar to highlight, to learn more about MRLs, learn more about how we can manage banana plantations for the export market. So EPA commends CropLife for your effort in continually educating the farmers and the general public on the safe application of agricultural input and promotion of good agricultural practice through our stewardship program. It is through webinars like this that we are able to reach out to the grassroots, particularly the farmers, by enabling them to understand the basic concept of good agricultural practice and the maximum residue limits. That will help our exports to be more competitive and acceptable in the global market. So with this, I congratulate all the participants, all those who are sharing this webinar, for investing time to make our banana industry a more competitive and vibrant industry on a global level. Thank you and mabuhay tayong lahat. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Director Roldan. So, as the inspirational message of Director Roldan just said, there's an emphasis on the contribution of the banana growers here in the Philippines on the Philippine agriculture. And also, let's keep being inspired as the four pillars that Director Roldan said keeps on working together. So right now, we have 190 watchers via FB Live and Zoom. And I would like to recognize some of them. Good morning from Sinochem. We have Eliza R. Canha of Marfori Agri Ventures Incorporated of Davao City. Jake D. Bagaan of Tadeco, Davao del Norte. Melvar B. Cubresis from Tropical Fresh Fruit Incorporated, Panabo, Davao del Norte. So good morning po sa inyong lahat. Good morning din po, Ma'am Jacqueline M. Romualdez, Pesticide Regulations Divisions of FPA. Good morning, ma'am. Ma'am Sarani Pasqua from Central Luzon State University. Good morning po. Alisa Brillantes, viewing from Northern Iloilo Polytechnic State College, Barotac Viejo Campus. Good morning po. Good morning, Sir Eugene Reporial from Caraga State University. So, madami po tayong viewers and I hope everyone will stay tuned. Yung 190 viewers and participants natin, sana madagdagan pa hanggang mamaya. And I will just remind everyone and I invite you to like and follow CropLife's Facebook page at CropLife Philippines. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, CropLife Philippines. You can watch this webinar there live. And please feel free to share it so your friends can join the webinar today. Moving on with the program, the first topic is about pesticide residues, basic concepts, GAP, PHI, and MRL. If you have questions on the topic, you can type it in the Q&A tab found at the bottom portion of the screen, and we will answer it later in the open forum. For those watching on FB and YouTube, you can also send in your questions through the chat panel. And to start the discussion on this topic, let me introduce our speaker. He is a graduate of UPLB with a bachelor's degree in agricultural chemistry. He is a licensed chemist and currently taking up his master's degree in agricultural chemistry at UPLB. He is currently a research associate at the National Crop Protection Center, and he is now the head of the Pesticide Toxicology and Chemistry Laboratory of the Pesticide Management Division of NCPC. Let's all welcome Mr. John Julius P. Manuben.
Good morning. Good morning to all of the participants in today's webinar. So, as have said by Director Willie Roldan, so Philippines is considered as one of the top exporters of banana globally. So indeed, we need to understand the and know the basic concepts surrounding the pesticide residues, the GAP, PHI, and the MRL. Next slide. Sir Bowie. So brief review on pesticides. So some common answers you may think are pamatay ng peste or insekto, panglaso ng peste or insekto, or gamot ng halaman. Next po. According to FAO, pesticides are any substance intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, or controlling any pest, including unwanted species of plants or animals during the production, storage, transport, distribution, and processing of food, agricultural commodities, or animal feeds, or which may be administered to animals for the control of ectoparasites. So pesticides are the chemicals used to control the insect pests and uh, any other any other animal pests. So pesticides major types includes the insecticides used for the control of insect pests, fungicides used for the pathogens causing diseases, and herbicides used for controlling weeds. So ano naman yung residues? Residues ay yung latak o natira in Tagalog. But in the context of pesticides, residues are the trace pesticides left in the treated products. So when pesticides are applied, there are pesticides or residues that will that remains on the surface or on the crop itself. However, for a more inclusive residue definition, this is a combination of the following. So parent compound, metabolites, degradation product, conversion product, and impurities. So ang parent compound is the pesticide itself. Example nito ay yung deltamethrin. So deltamethrin is the active ingredient and siya yung parent compound. Meta it can be degraded and into simpler compounds. So this can be the degradation products or some of the metabolites. An example of a degradation product of deltamethrin is thiocyanate. So in this residue definition, both the deltamethrin and the thiocyanate is part of the residue. Some of the pesticides, when they degrade or they form metabolites, some metabolites are more toxic than the pesticide itself. So they are toxicologically significant because of their toxicity. Next po. Importance of understanding pesticide residues. So first, pesticide residues and the food safety. So pesticides are applied on food and misuse and excessive use of pesticide may lead to high residues in food. So we need to protect the consumer by we need to protect the consumer by setting laws and limits on food. So in the case of occupational health, so people who face the greatest health risk from exposure to pesticides are those who come into contact into their work. So the people applying pesticide in the daily basis. Pesticide residues and environmental health. So some of the older pesticides, they have this persistency in the environment. So they may contaminate the soil and the water. So understanding the chemistry of the pesticide and the understanding the pesticide chemistry. So newer pesticides, they have lower lower half life and they do not contaminate or they do not persist in the soil and water. And for economic trade, so there are cases that there are reports that losses from exports that were denied due to exceedances in the MRLs. So exceedances in the MRLs may result to negative losses. The pesticide residues in the context of trade. So the most important concept to know is the maximum residue limit or the MRL. It is the highest level of a pesticide residue that is legally tolerated in or on food or feed when pesticides are in accordance with good agricultural practice or GAP. Before we dig in with the MRL, let us first discuss GAP and its relation with the MRL. So according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, GAP is the collection of principles to apply for on-farm production and post-production processes, including in safe and resulting in safe and healthy food and non-food agricultural products, while taking into account economic, social, and environmental sustainability. So there are different gaps, international and local gaps. So there is global gap, there is ASEAN gap, and there is the local gap, the bill gap. So brief review on the four modules of that gap. So produce quality, environmental management, worker health, safety and welfare, and food safety. So each of these four modules is divided into elements and different practices. So the different practices may be categorized into critical, major, and minor. So for critical practices, they are strictly followed. So GAP aims to provide food that is safe for consumption, which is defined in terms of food hygiene, cleanliness in production and preparation, and an absence of physical, biological, and chemical contamination. Farm management practices that promote ecological sustainability and enable farms to produce efficiently in a sustainable manner that leads to profitable returns. And lastly, dissemination of knowledge, training, and the provision of remunerative incentives and sustainable wages for laborers are imperative to ensure the effectiveness of good farm practices. So this slide summarizes all of the goal of GAP for the four pillars. Why is GAP important in banana industry? So this is GAP is important for the sustainability of production of bananas. So less risk for workers because the protocols are are designed for the safety of workers and produce quality bananas. So there is one company from the Philippines attested the increase in banana production through the use of GAP. GAP benefits for banana producers, so acceptance by retailers meaning um, the increased confidence on to penetrate the market because they are sure that the banana produced are of high quality. So possible improvements to quality of bananas, possible higher yields, and compliance with national and international regulations, standards, and guidelines. So the Codex, ICCPM, ICCDUP, and IPPC. Regarding pest management procedures and permitted pesticides, maximum residue levels of pesticides in products, as well as other chemical, microbiological, and physical contamination. So as I've said earlier, one company tested to increase production of bananas per day. So in 2009, they harvested 2,800 boxes of banana per day, and in 2010, 3,400, and in 2011, 3,800 because of their compliance to GAP. Next slide. So one important concept in GAP with regards to the use of pesticides is the presence of chemical hazards in food. So pre-harvest interval is one of the key concepts when plant protection products are used. So the minimum amount of time between the last application of pesticides and harvest of the crop. PHI is pesticide crop specific, and compliance to PHI is critical to ensure that residues are within acceptable level at harvest. So PHI is included in every label of should be included in the label of pesticide. So in the directions for use, you can see the PHI of the pesticide. And after PHI, pwede nang harvestin ito. So PHI is usually expressed in parts per million. ppm, so the value, the unit is ppm. It can be expressed in milligrams active ingredient per kilogram commodity and in ppb, but mostly in ppm. And the analogy is 1 ppm is 1 second in around 11.5 days. 1 ppb is 1 second in around 31.7 years. So 1 ppm is like 1 peso in 1 million pesos. So, question. If it starts raining following a pesticide application, can I reduce the PHI? And what if I use application rates below those found on the product's label? or apply pesticide in bands? So the answer, always follow the PHI required on the label. Not respecting the stated intervals on pest control labels could constitute a health risk and is therefore prohibited. So always respect the PHI. If I apply more than one pesticide that has different pre-harvest or restricted entry intervals at the same time, which intervals do I choose? To observe the established MRLs for pesticides in your crop, you must always choose the longest PHI and REI found on the labels of the pesticide that were used in the tank mix. So always observe the PHI and follow the directions in the pesticide label. So we have an exercise, so true or false or unknown. So in the table shows the active ingredient and in their PHI in banana in days. So they metaweight 90 days, metomil 0 days, and pentation 14 days. So question 1, if a banana shipment to country X will take 4 days after harvest, it is acceptable to harvest the bananas 10 days after the application of pentation. So false. The the bananas is not acceptable to harvest 10 days after the application of pentation because pentation has PHI of 14 days in banana. So when PHI is determined, it is based on the produce remaining on the plant until harvest because that is the way the assay was conducted. So the once the produce is harvested, respiration changes in the fruit may break down or slow the breakdown of the pesticide. So we should always respect the PHI and harvest um, and follow the label. Question 2, so the table, and then the concentration of pesticide residues after the PHI is greater than the MRL. So after the PHI, the pesticide residues is greater than the MRL. Answer is false. If the rate used and PHI were properly followed. So if the recommended rate of the pesticide and the PHI were properly followed, the pesticide residues will not be greater than the maximum residue limits. So in Korea, they use this concept, the pre-harvest residue limit. So pre-harvest residue limit is a prediction, uh, predicted data. So they use this as a criterion for determining whether the growing crops would meet the MRL by predicting a residual level at the time of harvest. Appropriate measures are taken for potentially unsafe crops that have exceeded the PHRL before use, such as delaying the harvest or being altered for another use. So in the illustration in the left side, so this just shows the computed or predicted PHRL curve of acetamiprid in for the kimchi cabbage. So acetamiprid, as shown in the graph, has 14 days PHI, and the acetamiprid MRL for kimchi is 1 milligrams per kilogram. So they use this PHRL to determine if the crops on the actual field will exceed the MRL. So example, at 10 days prior to the PHI, so 2.03 milligrams per kilogram ang residue. So if they analyze and if they analyze the actual crops on the field and they determined that the pesticide residue at 10 days before harvest is less than the 2.03 value on the graph, so there's higher chance there is a high chance that the MRL will not be violated. However, if the pesticide residue determined at 10 days before harvest is greater than 2.03, there is a chance that the pesticide residue after 14 days will exceed the MRL. So they use this predictive analysis to efficiently and deliberate recommendations such as delaying the harvest or being altered for another use. So, so in the pesticide residues in the context of trade, so other countries have different gap as approved by their respective government regulatory agencies. So MRL varies from country to country. MRLs are specific. Many countries have codes of good operating practice with training for farmers and operators to ensure that pesticides are used at optimal levels. Some countries rely on the Codex Alimentarius Committee on Pesticide Residues to establish MRLs, whereas others set their own. MRL is specific for each crop pesticide combination and can vary from one country to another. Thus, there are literally thousands of MRLs. So, different food standard MRL. So, as I've said earlier, the FAO/WHO Codex Alimentarius Commission, they are uh, they are the international authority that establishing Codex MRLs. And then ASEAN MRLs set by the ASEAN countries for regional trade. The the positive list used by Japan and Korea, and the PNS or the Philippine National Standard established by the Fertilizer and Pesticide Authority and set/adopted by the Bureau of Agriculture and Fisheries Standards. Lastly, MRLs are based on the good agricultural practice. So exercise. So sa table, we have active ingredient diazinon and chlorothalonil, and we have their MRLs in banana in Japan, EU, and US. So refer to this table. Question 1. If country X will export mangoes that contain 0.2 ppm diazinon to EU, US, and Japan, which country or countries will reject the shipment? So country X will export mangoes that contain 0.2 ppm diazinon to EU, US, and Japan. Which countries will reject the shipment? So answer is not enough data available. Since the table here represents the MRL in banana, not in mangoes. So we need further data to answer this. Uh, we need to know the MRLs of mango in EU, US, and Japan. So not enough data available. Question number 2. If country X will export bananas with 10 ppm chlorothalonil to EU, will the EU accept it? So in the table, EU has chlorothalonil in banana has an MRL of 15 ppm, and the detected chlorothalonil in the bananas of the country X has only 10 ppm. So will the EU accept it? Yes, because it is within the MRLs set in EU. Last question. If country X will export bananas with 0.2 ppm diazinon to EU, US, and Japan, which country or countries will accept the shipment? So based on the table, US only will accept it. EU and Japan will reject it since the pesticide residues in the exported bananas has higher concentrations of diazinon compared to the MRL set in Japan and EU. Setting up pre-harvest interval and maximum residue limit. So PHI is set based on usage of the product in relation to the pest to be controlled. So it is crop pest specific. PHI is also set considering residues at harvest, and MRLs is also set considering residue data. So both PHI and MRLs are set by supervised pesticide residue trials. So supervised pesticide residue trials or crop field trials are conducted to determine the pesticide residue levels in or raw or agricultural commodities. So it is designed to reflect pesticide use patterns that lead to the highest possible residues. So highest possible residues. So the FPA requirements on SPRT for PHI and MRL setting, if a company is expanding the label of the pesticide to other crops not covered by the current label, SPRT is required. The revision of the original label recommendation as approved by the FPA, SPRT is required. Expansion of use pattern to pests occurring near harvest time. And lastly, the revision of the PHI requires the conduct of SPRT. So objectives of crop field trials to quantify the expected range of residues in crop commodities following treatment according to the proposed or established good agricultural practice. To determine, when appropriate, the rate of decline of the residues of plant protection products on commodities of interest. To determine the residue values for conducting dietary risk assessment and to derive the maximum residue limits. So this is just an illustration showing the example of sampling for pesticide with a projected PHI of 7 days. So after the spray application, so the sampling at 0 days. So they sampling at 0 days, they get samples at 1 day after the harvest, after the application of pesticide, 3 days after the application until they reach the uh, sampling after 7 days. So after the last spray application. So they use this as a sampling tool. This is just an example of a sampling um, graph for PHI. So MRL, tolerance, development, and crop. So this is just a short illustration on how the crop residue trials are used to obtain or to determine the maximum residue limits. So they use the maximum rate instead of the normal rate. So maximum application rate, they use the maximum number of applications and the shortest time to harvest. Remember, the SPRT uses the reflects the pesticide use patterns that lead to the highest pesticide possible residues. So when they use these parameters to they use the highest maximum. So maximum application rate and then number of applications. And then the SPRT is conducted on different sites. So example here is the site 1, site 2, site 3, and site 4. So after the experiment, they determine the pesticide residues in different sites. And here, the site 3 contains the highest residues detected in field trials, so at 0.2 ppm. So they will use this as the baseline. So for they obtain the 0.2 ppm, but in setting the MRLs, there is a tolerance set. So not 0.2 ppm will not be used, but a slightly higher value than 0.2 ppm, like 0.3 ppm, will be used. So just a brief illustration, short illustration on how MRLs are obtained. So summary, importance of understanding pesticide residues. GAP takes into account of minimum effective application rate intervals, timing and crop growth, and pre-harvest interval. So PHI is the interval between the day of last application of the pesticide to the day of the harvest of the crop. PHI and application timing are determined primarily by efficacy studies, economic threshold criteria, and residue studies. So MRLs for pesticides are established using verifiable residue data that take into account levels of residues in the crop following treatment according to GRAP principles. So that's the end. Um, Bale, short discussion, a short review lang talaga siya on or basic concept of the pesticide residues, PHI, MRLs, and the gap. If we will tackle it one by one, it will take an enormous amount of time to understand really the concepts behind all of this for farming. So that's all.
Thank you very much, Sir John Julius Manuben, for the information you have provided. For our viewers, if you have questions for Sir John Julius Manuben, you may type it in the Q&A box. If you're watching FB Live or YouTube, you can type it in the chat box. We have 3 questions right now. Let's address this one by one. Question from Sir Casper Fernandez. How long will be the residue of pesticides will degrade in soil?
So, ang tanong ni Sir ay how long will the pesticide degrade in soil?
Yes, sir.
So, it depends po on the chemistry of the pesticide. Number one, chemistry of the pesticide. Kasi pesticides have different families, so meron sila different structures. So, it will depend. So, example, meron kasing pesticide na mataas ang half-life. So, ang ibig sabihin, mas matagal silang nagpe-persist in the environment. Meron din kasing mas maikli yung half-life. Ang ibig sabihin, mabilis silang mag-degrade in the environment and in the soil. So, ang number 2 factor dito ay yung soil mismo. Kasi merong soil na mataas ang microbial activity, meron kasing soil na mababa ang microbial activity. Ibig sabihin, yung mga healthy soil, mataas ang microorganisms and yung medyo degraded soil na mababa. So mas mataas, magiging mataas ang degradation ng pesticide sa soil na may mataas na microorganisms kasi marami siyang microbial activity. Kasi ang degradation ng pesticide, marami siyang factors na kinukonsider like microbial activity, pwede rin yung temperature, yung humidity, and so yun yung mga factors. So depende po siya. It depends po on the characteristics of the pesticide itself and the environment. So ayun.
Thank you very much, Sir John Julius. I hope, Sir Casper, that your question has been addressed. Next question po is from Catherine Balura. Why is it that our local banana lakatan is, I think, showered with fungicide, yellow-colored powder, in the peel of banana fruits in the Talipapa here in Manila? I witnessed it here in Pasay, Makati, vendors along the streets, every time I buy it. FYI, thanks.
So they Ma'am Cathy have seen the bananas showered by yellow thing.
Yellow color powder.
Yellow colored powder. So hindi ko lang po sure kung ano yung yellow colored powder na yon, but I think hindi ko rin alam po kung pesticide, hindi rin natin alam kung yun ay pesticide ba talaga or kung ano mang additive or kung ano mang pwedeng pampahinog or ano what. So masasabi ko lang po is possibly the owners of the farmers who own the bananas, they do this to prevent the what do you call this, the specks in the banana, in the outer lip of the banana, so banana fruit. So kasi yung ang mga buyers kasi ayaw talaga nila ng medyo hindi makikinis na banana. So maybe one way ito siguro or paraan ng mga growers para babili yung kanilang crops. Kasi nga to protect na rin at to ensure na may kita sila. So without analysis, we cannot determine po if the yellow colored powder is a pesticide or some form of protectant or other protectants.
Thank you, Sir John Julius. Another question po from Sir Casper. Considering the independent banana growers using cocktail mixing when they spray their banana, what PHI should they follow? The longer or the shorter?
Ayun po, kanina sa slides ko kanina, may tanong doon na parang may tanong doon na kapag tank mix or kapag mixture of pesticides ang ginamit, the you will consider or you will follow the pesticide with the longest PHI to ensure po na walang violations dun sa directions. So always respect po the longest PHI.
Okay po, Sir Casper, I hope your question was answered. This question was typed in during you were answering the question, how long will be the residue of pesticides will degrade in soil? So yung question niya is, how about po yung use of herbicide?
And use of herbicides.
Yes, sir.
So, sabi ko nga po kanina, pesticides have different chemistry. So, for herbicides also. So, if you will research on this, makita nyo na may mga herbicides na kumakapit sa soil at may mga herbicides na nali-leach out. Ang ibig sabihin, nadadala siya ng tubig. So, yung pong degradation nito is dependent talaga. So, yung mga kumakapit po sa soil, yung mga herbicides na matagal ang ano niya sa soil, ibig sabihin, mas matagal siyang nade-degrade. Maaaring matagal siyang ma-degrade sa soil kasi nandun yung activity niya. Nakakapit po siya sa soil. So, mataas po yung activity niya pa dun sa soil. However, yung mga easily leach na herbicides, so an example ata nito is triazines. So, yung triazines, yung mga leachable na pesticide, yung herbicide, pagka-spray nila, wala silang capability to hold contact with the soil in a much longer time. So, nadadala sila ng tubig. So, may factor dito talaga yung physical characteristics ng pesticide, like solubility niya, yung kanyang yung kanyang solubility, yung kanyang lipophilicity, ang ibig sabihin kung siya ba ay mabilis madala ng tubig. So, yun po. Ganun pa rin po ang magiging sagot ko, different chemistries ng herbicide will determine the possible degradation rate of the herbicide.
Thank you very much, Sir John. We can only accommodate 2 more questions. So one question from Susan Mercado. Hi, you mentioned that PHI should be indicated for all products. I think this is not the practice. It is only for products whose pesticide application timing is close to harvest. For
Yes.
example, do you need a PHI for herbicides applied just after planting?
Yes po, yes po. Tama po si Ma'am Susan. So, may mga pesticides po na walang PHI sa label. Halimbawa po dito is yung mga herbicide and then yung mga pesticide na ginagamit sa seedling stage. Since they are not close to the harvest time, so they are not used, so wala silang PHI. So, tama po si Ma'am Susan na yung mga pesticide na usually ginagamit near harvest lang yung may PHI. Baka po magtaka po kayo, baka ma-confuse kayo na bakit itong isang certain pesticide ay walang PHI. So, reminder lang po na yung mga may PHI po ay yung usually pesticides na ginagamit near harvest time.
Thank you very much, Sir John Julius. One more question po. So, coming from Carl John J. Ayen, Sir Carl John J. Ayen. How to determine if the residue of one vegetable is high if you are in the field? Do we have the current technology in determination of residues? For example, test kits for different family of insecticides?
So it depends po yung pag-determine ng residue sa purpose. So example, for pag sa residue kasi sa field, kasi ano po yung purpose nung pag-determine ng residue sa field. So example, kapag gagamit po ng chromatographic analysis, usually ginagamit yun kapag i-determine mo talaga yung pesticide for yung residue for other purposes like for setting, for determining uh, the degradation rate of the pesticide. So they use the chromatographic analysis. However po sa field, you cannot do lab analysis. So there are certain kits like the residue test kit of NCPC. So this test kit po can determine semi-quantitatively. Tandaan po natin na ang mga test kit ay qualitative to semi-quantitative lang, and they cannot be used, the result of the test kit cannot be used to court, or kasi ang chromatographic analysis lang yung can be used legally. So yung po mga test kit available naman po, and so yung National Crop Protection Center has a test kit for carbamates and organophosphates.
Thank you very much, Sir John Julius. I hope Sir Carl's question was answered. In the interest of time, thank you very much, Sir John Julius, for the very informative talk. But in the interest of time, we will just collate all the questions from our viewers and send them to our speaker, and the answers will be sent to your registered emails. So thank you very much, Paul. And now we will move on to the second speaker of the day. She will talk about dietary risk assessment. So if you have questions on the topic, you can type it in the Q&A tab found at the bottom portion of the screen, and we will answer it later in the open forum. For those watching live on FB and YouTube, you can also send in your questions through the chat panel. So right now, I was informed that we already have 230 viewers via Zoom, FB, and YouTube. So our speaker for today is a graduate of BS Agricultural Chemistry at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, Masters in Food Science at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, and PhD in Entomology at UPLB also. She had postgraduate courses in environmental toxicology at the University of California, Davis, and had her postgraduate fellowship on pesticide residues in GSF, Germany. She is a licensed food technologist and a licensed plant entomologist. She was formerly the executive director of the Food Development Center of the National Food Authority, Department of Agriculture. She was an agricultural officer in pesticide residue specialist, Food and Agricultural Organization, and Secretariat of the Joint Experts on Pesticide Residues. She was a research associate professor of the Pesticide Residue Lab at the Department of Entomology, National Crop Protection Center. She is a recipient of numerous awards, authored and co-authored more than 60 publications, leaflets, training manuals. She presented 176 scientific papers locally and internationally, conducted more than 100 trainings on pesticide management and pesticide residues. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Amelia Tejada.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Carlo. Sorry for that brief biodata. First of all, thank you for inviting me, for CropLife for inviting me in this seminar on behalf of the residue evaluators of FPA. Today, I'm going to talk on the dietary risk assessment of pesticide residues in food. Actually, I just read the objective of this seminar and found out that it is only the aim to know the principles of dietary risk assessment in relation to MRLs. So I could have prepared only one slide because this is very simple. It's only the multiplication of the amount of pesticide on the crop and the crop, the weight of the crop divided by your body, no? Weight of your body. And this is compared with the acceptable daily intake, which is given by FAO, WHO, or by the, what is this? Compare it with acute reference dose, also given by FAO, WHO, Joint Meeting on Pesticide Residues. But because I have already prepared the slides, I can also give you the secret of how dietary risk assessment is done by our group. Although it is quite, you will see it complicated, but the principle is only a multiplication and division, comparing it with the ADI and acute reference dose. Okay, please slide 1. Okay, this is the title of my paper, Dietary Risk Assessment. As you may know, FAO, WHO developed scientific risk assessment to define safe exposure levels, which form the basis for the development of national and international food safety standards to protect the health of the consumers and ensure fair trade practices. Next slides, please. What is dietary risk? This is the risk from intake of biological, chemical, and physical agents in food. The estimated dietary intake is compared with the relevant toxicological reference value, such as the acceptable daily intake or acute reference dose, which are already given in the book of FAO and WHO, or Codex. Next slides. Next slides. So I am defining all the terms. What is acceptable daily intake? This is the estimate of the amount of a substance in food that can be ingested daily over a lifetime without appreciable risk. But the bases are the following: data on biochemical, metabolic, pharmacological, and toxicological studies on experimental animals and observations in humans. The endpoint is the no observed adverse effect level, which was also on experimental, the most sensitive species of experimental animal. You can see this ADI and acute reference dose on the FAO WHO book, or the Codex also, for all pesticides. Next slides, please. What is acute reference dose? This is just the same with acceptable daily intake, but this one is an estimate of a substance in food that can be ingested over a short period of time during one meal or one day without appreciable health risk to the consumer on the basis of all known facts at the time of evaluation. Next slides, please. Why is dietary risk assessment necessary? This provides the scientific basis for risk management decision to reach a conclusion on the acceptability of the proposed MRLs and the underlying gap. It ensures that the MRL established has no possible health concern. Next slides, please. This is a schematic diagram for dietary intake assessment for pesticide residues of long-term hazards. In the international or in the national, even at the national level, we evaluate the data, but for the JMPR, they establish the ADI and at national level, we establish our national MRLs. So let's take the national level. we calculate the national theoretical maximum daily intake and compare this with the ADI. We use theoretical maximum daily intake, theoretical because we use the Codex MRL. This is just the same with calculating the NEDI, or the National Estimated Daily Intake, and compare it with acceptable daily intake. So NEDI if we use the proposed MRL at national level, okay? So at the international level, of course, we use the international data for all countries, no? For the estimated dietary intake. And for the theoretical maximum daily intake, also they use the MRL of the Codex. So they are just the same at the international and national level. Next slides, please. There are actually 4 steps in risk assessment. We have the hazard identification, hazard characterization, exposure assessment, and risk characterization. I will define it in the following slides. Hazard, next slides. Hazard identification is the identification of the type and nature of adverse effects that a pesticide may cause in an organism. Hazard characterization is the qualitative and quantitative description of the inherent property of a pesticide having the potential to cause adverse effects. This should include a description of its mode of action, a dose response assessment, and the establishment of a threshold dose level, which is not toxic and are no longer observed. Next slides, please. Risk characterization is the qualitative and quantitative estimation of the probability of occurrence and severity of known potential adverse health effects in a given population based on hazard identification, hazard characterization, and exposure assessment. So these are all the 3. Okay. There are 2 types of dietary intake: the long-term dietary intake and the short-term dietary intake. The long-term dietary intake means the lifetime intake of food containing residues of pesticides without any appreciable risk. And the short-term dietary intake is the highest intake of food containing residues eaten in one sitting without any appreciable risk to human health. Next slides, please. Risk assessment of long-term dietary intakes are expressed as percentage of the acceptable daily intake for a 60-kilogram person or 55 kilograms for Filipinos or Asians. Next slides, please. This is the one that I was telling at the start of my presentation, the calculation of the long-term intake. We have the national estimated daily intake. This is the proposed MRL, no? Multiplied by the consumption divided by the weight of a kilogram body weight. So this is the percent ADI is equal to the NEDI over the ADI multiplied by 100. This is the estimated risk. Next slides, please. This is an example of the estimation of long-term dietary risk for chlorpyrifos. Please, the data are just for purposes of, are not actual data, but these are just for purposes of demo. Oh, okay, the concentration multiplied by the food intake is the estimated intake, okay? Then you total this, multiplied everything, all these commodities multiplied by the this food intake is the amount of residue. This is the amount of commodity that we eat, no? And this concentration is the amount of pesticide that is contained in this commodity. So the total is 0.538 kilogram. Next slides, please. This 0.538 milligram divided by the 55 kilogram body weight is equal to 0.00978 milligram per kilogram body weight. Compare this with the ADI, which is 0.01 milligram per kilogram body weight, is equal to 97.8% of the ADI. So we are not exceeding the 100%. We are still within. Next slides, please. Here is an example of one commodity only, the mango. I'm sorry, but I should have taken the banana. But anyway, it's just the same, no? The ADI for pyriproxypen is 0.1 milligram per kilogram body weight. And the food intake for mango is 9.6 grams. So this is the proposed MRL for mango is 0.02. So 0.02 multiplied by the food intake in kilograms divided by the kilogram body weight. So it will give you 3.5 times 10 to the minus 6 or 0.0035%. So way below the acceptable daily intake. So we are still within, we are not exceeding, no? We are not exceeding any of the ADI. Next slides, please. So if the national estimated daily intake of residues do not exceed acceptable daily intake for that specific pesticide, it can be concluded that the long-term intake of the residues of pesticide resulting from its use is unlikely to present any public health concern. Okay? If the NEDI is less than the ADI, it's okay. If the national estimated daily intake exceed the acceptable daily intake, the proposed MRL may not be accepted and should be modified in such a way that it will not pose risk to human health. So that's NEDI. If greater than ADI, it's not okay. We have to modify some of the gaps, especially the PHI maybe. So this is JMPR calculation of risk from long-term dietary intake. This is an international estimation. So we do not know. We do not do that. But you can see that the Far East, we belong to the under the Far East because there is no data for the Near East. So it's just the same. The diet multiplied by the concentration of pesticides, and the total here is the percent of ADI is 21, 51 for the Far East, 38 for African, 10 for Latin American and European. So very seldom there is an exceedance of the ADI for a long-term dietary intake. No, we have not seen any exceedance yet. Next slides, please. For short-term intake assessment, we do not do this at the FPA. At FPA, we do not do the short-term intake. We only evaluate the long-term intake. Why? Because we do not have the data, no, to compare with the acute reference dose. Actually, even in the long term, we did not the survey. The Philippines did not reply to the survey of FAO and WHO. The more for this short-term intake, no? This short-term intake is the estimate of high intake of pesticide residue in one sitting based on highest residues. I have mentioned that. Then they have a survey of the large portion sizes and fruit and vegetables. Unit weights have been provided by a number of countries, but more such data are needed. The short-term intake is calculated for each food separately. There is a large portion size, the highest multiplied by the highest residue, multiplied by the variability factor, and compare this with the acute reference dose. When short-term exposure exceeds the acute reference dose, the risk assessors examine residue data from supervised trials with alternative gaps to compare those alternative short-term exposures with acute reference dose. If an estimated alternative short-term exposure does not exceed the acute reference dose, a maximum residue level is proposed based on that gap. Next slides, please. There are 3 cases of short-term intake. Case 1, when the unit weight is less than 25 grams. Say, for example, unit weight of a grape is less than 25 grams. Case 2, when the unit weight of the commodity is greater than 25. Let's say a unit weight of apple. So this is case 2. And then case 3, the processed commodities such as the milk and the flour. Next slides, please. So I would not delve so much on this short term because it's just the same, no? The large portion or the large portion of the commodity times the highest residue divided by the weight. So it's still the same, no? Next slides, please. Next slides, please. Case 2, there are 2 cases in case 2, 2A and 2B, where the edible portion is less than the large portion. So although there are a lot of variables here, still this is multiplication divided by the body weight. And this variability factor is a fix already done by this is already done by the GMPR, by a lot of experts meeting. Case 2B, the unit weight, the large portion multiplied by highest residue times the variability factor divided by the body weight. And the case 3, the processed commodity, this large portion multiplied by the MRLP, this is the processed residue divided by the body weight. Okay, next slides, please. Next slides, please. So this is an example of the JMPR calculation for general population and children up to 6 years for the short-term intake. Now let's just take. I got the simplest one. Not yet, please. Previous. Sorry, I'm still talking with the previous slides. But anyway, this is the short-term dietary risk assessment conducted by 2003 JMPR. You will see here now the same multiplication divided by the body weight. You will see that for general population, there are a lot of exceedances. This is compared with the acute reference dose. See, for example, the acetate in apple, in cauliflower, in mandarin, and pear, no? They exceeded a lot, no? But more especially for children up to 6 years, we have exceedance of almost all apple, beans, broccoli, cauliflower, mandarin, nectarine, pear, chili pepper, and other commodities. See, almost all commodities have exceeded the acute reference dose. For carbosulfan, no. Carbofuran, no. So dimethylate a lot again. For dodine, none. For phenyltrethione, a lot again of exceedances of the acute reference dose. See, there are lots of exceedances for the acute reference dose, but none yet for the acceptable daily intake. No? The MRL has not exceeded any of the acceptable daily intake. Next slides, please. In conclusion, I would say that dietary risk assessment, see, this is now the relation. This is a prerequisite to MRL establishment. If the estimated daily intake exceeds the acceptable daily intake, the proposed MRL is not accepted, or the proposed MRL will not be forwarded to step 8, because in Codex there are 8 steps before it is adopted as international MRL. So the Philippines is following the Codex according to FAO manual and as stipulated in the Food Safety Act of 2013. Similarly, if the estimated short-term intake, although we are not doing this, is greater than the acute reference dose, the proposed MRL should be further refined using other graphs and consumption data, no? Especially the PHI. You will not like to harvest it at 0-day PHI. The percentages above 100 should not necessarily be interpreted as giving rise to health concern, because they have calculated all this. They have already too much of this they have calculated with too much how do you call that, they have taken care of everything. At the very beginning they have already the 100 for the ADI, they have computed it with times 100 safety factor. So that's why they could not, you could not just say that if it exceeds the ADI or the acute reference dose, it's not it will affect the health of the consumers, not yet, because they are still looking at it very well. They have put a big safety factor already in computing the ADI and the computing the acute reference dose. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, okay, thank you. That ends my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Mel, for that very informative talk. We have questions, and we will address it now. So one question is from Ma'am Christy Bahet. For regulatory
I
assessment,
talk on behalf of Christy Bahet too, because she is an evaluator.
yes po ma'am. So from Ma'am Christy Bahet, for regulatory assessment, what if the NEDI is greater than ADI? Shall the label expansion application be denied?
No, not yet, But they have, we do not call it denied, but we have to request them to look at the different gaps, no? Because the PHI, if they say that the PHI is 3, you can have a what do you call that? Longer day PHI, or really you have to change the SPR tip, you have to change the rates, no, of application. But because you have the high and the low gap, no, I mean the rates, you can take the lower rate and just don't recommend the higher rate. So that's one way of improving the gap without any repetition of the SPRT. Okay?
Thank you very much po, Ma'am Mel. So Ma'am Mel is recommending to use the lower rate or extending the PHI to lower the NEDI.
Also
Another
the
question.
consumption,
And
also it say the consumption is also should be also considered.
Noted po, Ma'am Mel.
Because I always use, for my calculation, I always use myself eating the highest, the highest commodity, the highest weight that I can eat. Say, for example, in the common there in the FNRI, only mango is only about 100 grams. For me, I can eat as much as 500 grams, no? So you can compute if you are going to eat a lot, or you can ask, am I exposing myself too much from risk? Huh? So that is the question. Now that you know risk assessment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you po, Ma'am Mel. Another question from Mr. Jasper Sarmiento. Hello po. Is there appreciable risk po from pesticide residues observed in peels of some commodities like banana and tomato through contact toxicity? Thank you po.
Oh, yes, of course. Yan ang ano. Actually, I do not find any so much risk on dietary exposure, but more risk on workers' exposure. But the risk for human exposure is different, different calculation, more complicated than the dietary risk. Okay, thank you.
Thank you po, Ma'am Mel. I think all of the questions regarding this presentation has been addressed. If you have more questions, oh, there's another one. Good morning. Is it true that azoxystrobin cannot be traced for MRL issue at destination? Question from Jonald Rosal.
What?
Azoxystrobin, ma'am.
Cannot be?
Traced for MRL issue at destination.
Cannot be traced?
Traced po, ma'am. Traced.
Trace, yeah.
Yeah.
Why? Cannot be traced, azoxystrobin? Cannot be traced when it is exported to other countries. Is that the question?
Ma'am, medyo limited po yung kanyang question eh.
If the residue is really below the detectable limit, you cannot trace it anymore. No? So there is always, in all our data submission, we should get the limit of detection and the limit of quantitation, because that is the amount, the lowest amount that can be detected in that particular, with that particular pesticide. So we always require that, the limit of detection and the limit of quantitation. And we adapt that, the lowest limit of quantitation, we adapt it as the MRL. No? And that is also, in EU, the LOD is the adopted MRL for all pesticide, for all commodities that they do not have. So ang tawag nga nila doon ay what do you call that? Parang fixed MRL.
Okay po, ma'am. So I hope Sir Jonald's question was addressed. Thank you very much po, Ma'am Mel, for addressing all of the questions. If you still have a lot of questions to ask, you can type them in the chat box or question and answers tab. We will have them addressed by our speakers. But for now, we should proceed to our next topic, updates on the review of PNS MRL for banana and development. Our next speaker graduated from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines with the degree of Bachelor of Science in Nutrition and Dietetics. She is a licensed nutritionist dietitian. She was project assistant at the Food and Nutrition Research Institute of the DOST and presently a science research specialist at Bureau of Agriculture and Fisheries Standards of the Department of Agriculture. Let's all welcome Ms. Cristel Alaris R. Aborido.
Hello po. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Sir Carlo.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone, to all panelists and participants. And as I can see from the list of participants, there are some of the technical working group members of the Philippine National Standard for MRLs. And also, before I proceed with my presentation this morning, I'd like to thank the CropLife Philippines for inviting us to present the Philippine National Standard for MRL of pesticides in banana. So proceed na po tayo with the next slide. Okay, so For the presentation outline this morning, I'd like to present to you the standard definitions and principles, and also the project overview for PNS MRLs in banana, the technical working group composition, the standards development process, and last would be the update on the revision of PNS for MRLs in banana. So let's now go with the standards definition and principles po. Okay, so according to the ISO IEC Guide of 2004, the standard is a document established by consensus. So what do we mean by consensus? It's a general agreement po and approved by a recognized body. So ang recognized body po natin dyan with regards to the agricultural products is the Department of Agriculture DA po. So that provides for common and repeated use, rules and guidelines or characteristics for activities or their results aimed at the achievement of the optimum degree of order in a given context. So as for the WTO Technical Barriers to Trade or TBT agreement, they defined standard as also guidelines or characteristics for products or related processes and production methods, with which compliance is not mandatory. So ang ating mga Philippine National Standard ay hindi po siya mandatory. Kailan lang pong nagiging mandatory ang isang standard? Pag ito po ay na-apply or inadopt na po ng regulatory agency. Here in the Philippines, the regulatory agency for the exports of the agricultural product is the Bureau of Plant Industry. So next is the importance of the standards. So tanong natin, no, bakit po tayo nagde-develop ng Philippine National Standard? Ano po ba ang kahalagaan nun? So first po is the consumer health, where product standards and also the code of practices, ito po yung mga guidelines na nag-ensure po for the safety and quality of the product. And next is the consumer protection, to be followed by the workers' health and safety. So as mentioned by the speaker earlier na ito po yung mga code of practices natin, not only to ensure po yung quality ng ating product or the farm production practices, but also para po maprotektahan din po yung ating farmer and also yung workers po at the farm. And next would be the environmental management. So it is important to develop standards not only to ensure the safety and suitability of food for consumption, but also to protect the environment. So with this po, we have developed standards po for organic produce and also code of practices for organic post-harvest production po. And last would be the global competitiveness. So Philippines, being a member of the World Trade Organization, ASEAN, APEC, bilateral and multilateral agreements, uh, we promote global competitiveness of agricultural products through the development of product standards, and also dito na rin po ipapasok yung ating standard for MRLs. So why? Kasi kino-consider po natin yung MRLs as a trading factor po doon sa ating world trade market. So next slide please. Okay, so we proceed with the basic principles of standards. So first, standards are science-based. That's why we request experts from the relevant regulatory agencies and private stakeholders, because the standard that we are developing are science-based, meaning these are standards that already proven and based in science. And of course, standards are internationally accepted and harmonized with Codex, IFOAM, and ISO. And last, as mentioned, again, the Philippines being a member of the World Trade Organization, ASEAN, APEC, and bilateral and multilateral agreements, standards are being developed should be consistent with the international commitments. Okay, so there are two laws that supporting the establishment of the Philippine national standards in the country. So ito po yung dalawang batas na nagbigay ng mandato sa aming ahensya, the Bureau of Agriculture and Fisheries Standards, para po gumawa ng Philippine National Standard. So first is the Republic Act 7394 or the Consumer Act of the Philippines of 1992. na state po dyan under Chapter 1 that it shall be the duty of the state to develop and provide safety and quality standards. And next is the Republic Act 8435 or Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Act, AFMA, of 1997. So na-mention din po dyan under Section 60, the use of product standards in order to ensure consumer safety and promote competitiveness. Okay, so Philippine Standard Setting in Agencies. Sa ngayon po, sa Pilipinas ay may 3 po tayong ahensya um, which developing standards po. So first po, for primary and post-harvest foods, we have the Department of Agriculture, Bureau of Agriculture, Fisheries and Standards, the agency I belong to. And then for the processed foods, we have the Department of Health, Food and Drug Administration po. And for the Department of Trade and Industry, Bureau of Product Standards, they develop standards naman po for the other industrial standards or non-food po. So how these three connect with each other po. So first po, tulad po na nasabi ko, the Bureau of Agriculture and Fisheries Standards, we develop standards for primary to post-harvest po. So kunyari po, gagawa po tayo ng banana ketchup. So yung primary, fresh po na produced banana, until the post-harvest po, pasok po sa amin yan. Pero pag ang banana ketchup po, ito po ay, gawin na po natin example ay tomato ketchup. So tomato as a produce, pero pag ito po ay pinrasis itong tomato, ito po ay papasok na sa Department of Health, Food and Drug Administration. So, after po ma-process yung tomato ketchup natin, naging ketchup na po siya, itong bote naman po na paglalagyan ng ating ketchup, ay pasok naman po ito yung mandato nito under the DTI BPS po. So kung makikita po ninyo, itong 3 ahensya na po ito ay nagtutulungan, may connection po sa bawat isa in developing po standards for the foods and consumers po. Okay, so next na po is the project overview with regards to the Philippine National Standard for MRLs. Again, as mentioned, we are the Bureau of Agriculture and Fisheries Standards. So we set standards po for fresh primary and post-harvest agricultural products po. And not only agricultural products, but we develop standards po for agriculture and fishery machinery tools and equipment. So next slide please. So next start po yung aming project development of Philippine National Standard for MRLs in 2013. Noong nag-submit po ng Resolution Number 4 ang Committee on Fruits and Vegetables ng Philippine Council for Agriculture or PCAF, doon po sa Office of the Department of Agriculture Secretary para po mag-establish na national standard on pesticide residue. And then it was followed in 2014 as per Special Order Number 5800 Series of 2014, nabuo po dyan ang technical working group po natin to facilitate po yung adoption of the initial list of maximum residue limits. So ang first batch po ng commodities na nagawan po natin ng national MRLs ay yung asparagus, banana, mango, okra, pineapple, and rice po. So through the years, BAFs have established national MRLs for 20 commodities po, as you can see on your screen po. So these are the commodities po na nagawa natin ng national MRLs. So in 2015, ito po yung first batch. And then followed by the local crops. In 2018, we established po yung ating MRLs. So this is an adoption of list of approved MRLs po ng mga pesticide na registered under Fertilizer and Pesticide Authority. So these are the bitter gourd, coffee beans, eggplant, garlic, onion, tomato, and string beans. And in 2020 naman po, na-establish po yung ating MRLs for imported crops. So, this is an adoption naman po no list of harmonized MRLs ng pesticide products from the ASEAN MRLs database po. So, these are the apples, citrus fruits, grapes, longan, lychee, orange, and pear. And also in 2020, we revised po yung standard ng rice. And then next, ayan po, for the technical working group composition. So what do we mean by the technical working group? So these are the experts that we tap to assist in the development of standards and subsequent information dissemination activities. So they are the experts from the DA regulatory agencies, other national government agencies, academic and research institutions, private sector organizations, and non-government organizations. So we tap them to assist in the development of standards. So what do we mean by that? They provide, or the experts provide us with the scientific inputs, advice, and technical recommendations to the PNS. And when we say the information dissemination activities, this means the participation of the technical working groups or the technical working group members in stakeholders consultation that we conduct in the public po. So as you can see on your screen, this is the structure of the technical working group for Philippine National Standards of MRLs. So not just in banana, not just with other commodities, but the whole commodities po na ginagawa po namin ng standards for maximum residue limits. So as you can see, the chairman or the chairperson of the technical working group is headed by a representative from the Bureau of Plant Industry. And the BAFS director acts as the advisor, and the BAFS project manager, yours truly po, which acts as the secretariat of the technical working group. And then the co-chairman or co-chairperson of this technical working group is a representative from the Fertilizer and Pesticide Authority. So as you can see, dito po ay may members po tayo ng technical working group from the government agencies. Meron po tayong representatives from PICAF and DA High Value Commodity Development Program, DA Food Development Center, and DOST Food and Nutrition Research Institute. So these are the representatives po from the government sector. And from the academic and research institution, we have a member from the UPLB National Crop Protection Center. And for the private stakeholders po, from the private sector, we have representatives from Integrated Chemists of the Philippines, CropLife Philippines po, and also the Crop Protection Association of the Philippines. Okay, so proceed na po tayo with the standards development process. So ito po yung proseso or process flow on how we develop standards, Philippine national standards po. So as you can see on your screen, ito po yung structure process flow. First, we establish po yung technical working group. So after we request nomination letters, request the regulatory agencies and private stakeholders of the representatives para po mapabilang sa ating technical working group, we identify and prioritize po the commodities for standardization of MRLs. And then after we identify and prioritize po yung mga commodities na gagawa natin ng Philippine National Standard, we check or we request data from the Fertilizer Pesticide Authority with regards doon po sa registered MRLs of the commodity po. So may katanungan po dyan with regards kung may MRLs po bang registered under this commodity or wala. So pag wala po, in the absence of FTA-registered MRLs, the MRLs recommended by Codex or ASEAN will be used as the baseline data. And kung meron naman po, the usage of registered MRLs from FTA, yun po yung i-consider natin as baseline data. So baseline data on what? Next na po tayo mag-proceed with the comparative review of the baseline data of MRL. So dito po gumagawa kami ng comparative matrix. Nilalagay po namin dyan yung mga data na nakuha namin from FTA and also yung data na nakuha namin from the other trading partner countries, Codex MRLs, and ASEAN. So binabangga po namin yung mga MRLs ng bawat bansa and also yung mga MRLs from Codex and ASEAN po. And then the technical working group would discuss po on the MRLs to be adopted by the PNS. So this is done by the series of technical working group meetings po with the experts. And then after po nun, the circulation of draft PNS MRLs would be circulated doon po sa ating technical working group para po ma-review pa po. And then once decided po na ma-review and also ito po ay okay na i-present sa public, we conduct a public information forum po. And also we at the same time we post the draft PNS sa ating BAFS website in case po meron din pong other private sectors na gustong mag-comment or gusto pong makita ang ating draft PNS na hindi makaka-attend sa ating public information forum. But as of now po, since we are experiencing a pandemic, lahat po na ating activities with regards to the technical working group meetings and also the stakeholders consultation, they are done po through online. So also we kaya po nag-decide din ang BAFS to establish po yung online commenting system namin. So in case po na-miss ng isang participant yung ganitong event with regards to the other standards, makakapag-post pa rin po siya ng comment on the standard itself. And then after we conduct the public information forum for the Philippine National Standard for MRLs, the technical working group again together through finalization meeting, fina-finalize po nila yung draft PNS MRLs natin together with the comments from the public information forum. But actually po, later on, i-explain ko po sa inyo yung uniqueness nitong standards development process natin for MRLs and bakit po ito naiiba sa ibang standards development process na ginagamit namin for other usual crops. And then after po, let's go back to the process. After po na ma-finalize ng technical working group natin yung ating standard for MRLs, sabihin ng ating technical working group, okay na ito for endorsement kay DA Secretary. So ito po, ini-endorse na po ng technical working group ang ating draft PNS for MRLs with the DA approval po. And then after po ito ma-endorse kay DA Secretary and he approves na po yung ating draft PNS MRL, saka lang po siya nagiging Philippine National Standard. And then after the endorsement from the DA, we submit a copy po to the DTI, Bureau of Philippine Standards, for repository po. And then diyan na po nagiging established po yung ating Philippine National Standards for MRLs of pesticides for a certain commodity. Again, sorry po. Again, tulad po na nasabi ko, itong process flow po na nakikita ninyo on the standardization ng ating Philippine National Standard for MRLs, ito po ay naiiba sa usual process na aming ginagamit with other commodities. Kasi po, we conduct public information forum to the stakeholders. So, dito through this activity po, ini-inform namin yung public with the registered MRLs under FPA, yung aming inadopt po na MRLs. So we don't collect comments with regards to the MRLs po na aming pinipresent. Siguro po we accept comments with regards to the editing po ng PNS and other comment suggestions on that. But the MRLs itself na pinapresent po namin sa public, hindi na po ito nababago. Since remember that these are MRLs na na-establish ng isang recognized body, which is the Fertilizer and Pesticide Authority. So may proseso na po itong pinagdaanan before po ma-approve itong MRL na to. Okay, next. Yan. So as mentioned po, the adoption or yung flow po ng adoption of MRLs po natin, as PNS, first, check po namin yung existing approved PNS. And in the absence of the approved PNS or national MRL po established in a country, we then look at the data of the FPA registered MRLs po. And then in the absence of the FPA registered MRLs, we decide to adopt the Codex Alimentarius and ASEAN po na MRLs. And also we consider the other MRLs from the other trading partner countries po. Okay. So proceed po tayo sa update on the revision of PNS for MRLs in banana. Again, in 2015, banana was one of the commodities included in the list of establishment po ng national MRL po natin. So we identified in 2015 that there are 21 registered MRLs adapted po. And we decided ngayong pong taon na to start the revision for MRLs ng banana since ilang taon na po ang nakalipas, and upon checking po, marami na rin po tayong MRL na na-registered po under FPA for banana. So as you can see on your screen, we have identified 84 MRLs for adoption po. So napabilang na po dyan yung 18 registered MRLs na meron po tayo in 2015, and also we included the 15 Codex MRLs for adoption po. Okay, so for the status on the revision of PNS for MRLs in banana, the technical working group meetings for that or for this project is still ongoing po. But just to give you an update, among the sorry, I haven't edited my presentation before. So 83 po pala siya, sorry. For the adopted MRLs po, we identified 42 MRLs po. And for verification, we have 41 MRLs po. So we cannot, hindi ko pa po mapresent sa inyo yung MRLs na adopted po or na pagdesisyonan na i-adopt ng technical working group until this will be endorsed to the DA Secretary at maaprubahan po ni DA Secretary. So ito lamang po yung numbers ng ating adopted MRLs, and for verification naman po, as for verification na term dyan, ito po yung mga pending MRLs po natin with concerns to the registrant company. So kino-confirm din po namin not just the submitted data from FPA, we verify them to its registrant companies kung tama po ba na ito po yung MRLs na pinropose ng isang registrant company kay FPA. So until po na hindi po ma-adapt as PNS itong ongoing na revision po natin for MRLs in banana, refer po muna tayo doon sa Philippine National Standard or yung old version po ng ating PNS. So as you can see on your screen, pwede po bang pa-previous slide po? Ayan. Meron po tayo dyan na link for the list of approved PNS. So it's not only for the maximum residue limits, but all the approved PNS developed by the Bureau of Agriculture and Fisheries Standards. And also if you can refer or for the MRL database, meron din pong in-establish si BAFS na pesticide MRL database. This is just like doon po sa Codex, kasi Codex po ang ginawa naming reference on this. So makikita po ninyo if you'll visit this link, yung ating list of commodities with established MRLs, and also kung ano po yung mga pesticides na and also MRLs na approved po doon under that commodity. And before I end my presentation, I'd like to share screen lamang po, kung okay lang. I-share screen ko lamang po yung example po natin ng standard para po magka-idea ang ating participants. Ayan po. So nakikita nyo na po ba? Okay. May nakikita po ba sa screen?
Wala pa po, ma'am Coco.
Okay po, wait lang po . Ayan, so mukhang nag-error po ata from my side. Ayan, so later on po, pag ano na lang siguro, for the circulation
Hello, good morning to all. I think Ma'am Coco has experienced the technical difficulty on her end. And also, if
of
the
you ng idea on how we
okay, dito na si
establish
Ma'am.
Philippine national standards for banana. Thank you very much po.
Yes, Ma'am Coco, nawala kayo sa screen for about 30 seconds. So if you can just repeat. Yes, good morning and thank you, Ma'am Coco, for that presentation.
Thank you
Although
po.
nawala ng couple of seconds. So we have questions to be answered. We will read them. So one question from Ma'am Cyril Tura. Good morning. Thanks for this informative discussion. Since we discussed on the MRL and residue limits and the dietary risk assessment. Thanks po. My question is, meron po bang existing legal action ng ating government on this or monitoring yung sa local growers na banana and other commodities? Kasi pansin ko po, tanging exports lang yung may MRL check versus on the local growers na wala po or meron man limited. And true to all na binebenta sa palengke. Thank you for answering this.
Okay po. So, from Miss Cyril Tura po, no? Okay,
Yes.
read ko lang po ng konti. Because actually, good morning po sa lahat and to Miss Cyril. Actually, I'm not the responsible person to, I think I'm not the competent person to answer this with regards to the legal action po na ating gobyerno doon po sa monitoring. Because as I've said earlier, the regulatory agency po for monitoring the MRLs and also the for other agricultural products ay Bureau of Plant Industries po. But then again, itong Philippine National Standard po natin once approved ni DA Secretary at makonsidered po siya as Philippine National Standard, this is circulate po namin siya sa lahat po ng ahensya and also pinapublish po namin siya doon po sa aming website para po makita or magkaroon po nung dissemination po nung information with regards to the established MRLs po natin for commodities po. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ma'am Coco. I hope Ma'am Cyril's question has been answered. Next question po, we will only entertain another two questions from Ma'am Carla Laguna. We have established MRL po for bitertanol, but it is meant to be omitted in PLS by December 2021. Will PNS omit it as well? If so po, do we have to appeal for its MRL extension in PNS?
Okay po. Thank you for the question, Miss Carla. Again, I'm very sorry po but I'm not the competent person to answer po with regards doon sa other legal actions po. But during the technical working group meetings, we encountered po tulad po ito pong technical working group meeting namin for banana, aming representative from the Fertilizer and Pesticide Authority, in-advise po kami na ang deltametrin for banana ay inalis po nila as per memorandum circular. So every legal action po of the regulatory agency or the recognized body for Fertilizer and Pesticide Authority, hindi po namin siya sinasama sa PNS po. Ayun po.
Thank you po, Ma'am Coco. And for the last question from Sir Lyndon Katay. Hi po, how many days or months does PNS will be approved per commodity? Thanks.
Okay po. So with regards to the Philippine National Standard for banana, ito pong revision natin ng PNS MRS for banana. Ang targeted date po namin dyan ay sana po ay ma-endorse na ngayong June 2021. But as to generalize po lahat ng Philippine National Standards na ginagawa ng BAFS, ito po ay depende sa technical working group discussion kasi minsan po nade-delay or minsan po nagkakaroon po nung kumbaga po parang yun nga po delay doon sa mga agreements and also kasi may mga factors po yan with regards to the for the review and also ito pong PNS natin ay ito po ay tulad nga po na nasabi ko, science-based po ito at ito po ay pinag-aaralan or nire-review po talaga ng ating technical working group. So, hindi po namin masasabi na dapat ganitong month or dapat ganito ay endorse na siya sa ating DA Secretary. So, depende po itong ang takbo ng ating Philippine National Standard sa technical working group discussions po natin. Thank you very much po.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Coco, for addressing the questions. The rest of the questions will be forwarded to the speakers and will be answered, and the answers will be sent to your registered email address. Before we conclude this webinar today, let's all welcome the Executive Director of CropLife Philippines, Sir Ed De Luna.
Maraming salamat, Carlo. Bago po natin tapusin ang ating programa ngayong araw, I would like to thank the participants for spending 2 hours with us discussing on the discussion of important topics on MRLs, GAPs, dietary assessment, and the last topic on the ongoing review of policies on Philippine National Standard for MRLs, including that of banana. At peak, I think there are 139 participants who registered online. So I don't know how many are on our Facebook Live. But nevertheless, would like to express again our appreciation to all of you for attending this webinar. And let me take this opportunity to express our gratitude to our resource speakers, Julius of NCPC, Doc Mel, and of course Coco, for sharing their time with us, their expertise. We will send your respective certificates in your registered email account. We will likewise email you the copies of the presentation for your reference. And before I close, I would like also to express our appreciation to Director Wiri Roldan of the Fertilizer and Pesticide Authority, who has been very supportive of us since we started this kind of webinars last week. To the entire staff of APA who attended today's activities, our colleagues from BAPS, and of course, before I forget, the members of the board of directors of CropLife Philippines, headed by our president, Beng Tiburcio, for being always supportive of the different initiatives of CropLife Philippines, the technical and regulatory committee who organized this forum today, and special thanks to Carlo, to Beth, to Bowie, and Joel of iFarm for the technical support they rendered to make this activity successful. We look forward in seeing you again in the future webinars of CropLife Philippines. Good morning and thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Sir Ed, for the message. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining today's webinar. I hope you all learned a lot today. And to keep informed of our future webinars, kindly like, follow, visit, and subscribe to our Facebook page, YouTube channel, and our website. So once again, thank you and see you on the next webinar.